average person in China today is 7 times richer than 25 years ago. The average person in India has become 3.5 times richer over the same period. Meanwhile, the average South African is only 1.3 times better. Growth in emerging markets is lower partly because of the global slowdown, but also due to domestic policy missteps, which we can avoid.
Well, good evening and welcome to Unfiltered on SABC 3 and SABC News Channel 404. I'm your host, Desiree Chauke. South Africa is facing a quagmire of a stagnant economy, many social ills, and unemployment is running rampant. The recent stats on unemployment point to dire figures at 29%. This was the highest rate of joblessness since 2003. Recently released World Economic Forum or Global Competitiveness Report results in 2019 ranked South Africa the 110th out of 141 countries for the quality of labour market policies in helping unemployed people to reskill and find new employment. And South Africa also has the joint 4th highest unemployment rate out of 182 countries. And more bad news. On Friday, Moody's Investor Service changed the outlook on South Africa's credit ratings to negative from stable. Labour, business and politicians and civil society have all been scratching heads trying to come up with solutions. Nothing seems to be working. So joining us tonight is Professor Alex van den Heever, who is the chair of the Social Security Systems at Wits University. We also have the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, the General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi. Kusela Diko is the spokesperson for President Cyril Ramaphosa. We also have the Deputy General Secretary of the National Council of Trade Unions, Edward Tobejane. And also from our Durban studios, we have the President of COSATU, Zingiswa Lo. He's joining us from our Durban studios. A very good evening to all of you. Kusela, let's start with you. A year down the line, as a result of the Presidential Jobs Summit, the Presidential Working Committee on Jobs was formed, meets every Monday. It was meeting this morning, and you've just released a statement saying the President is happy with the successes that it has achieved so far. What are those successes? We're engaging our viewers on social media today, asking them if it has worked, and they don't feel the same.
Well, thank you, Desiree, for the invitation. Let's remember that the Presidential Working Group on the Job Summit, which met this morning, was an intervention. It followed the first meeting, which was supposed to report back on progress, following the Job Summit, which was held last year. Now, in that particular meeting, the President and the Deputy President, every single first Monday of the month, they sit with the social partners represented in NEDLAC and look at the interventions that have been made based on those agreements that the Job Summit had adopted. Now, what we have recorded thus far is obviously, firstly, an unblocking mechanism. When we sit there, the President would ensure that government is represented, labour is there, civil society is there, as well as business, and really speaking to the issues that need to be unblocked, the hindrances to the work that we need to do. One of the things that we're most proud of to date has obviously been the work that we've done in terms of fast-tracking the release of the information memorandum on spectrum. You remember that there were a number of reforms that were identified. We received a report on the visa regime, which has obviously been a bottleneck for us to grow our tourism numbers, for us to ensure that we're able to attract skilled migration. But it's not only about job creation. When we speak about these reforms, it's also about stemming the job losses that we've seen in the country over a period. So one of the things that the Job Summit looks at is, for example, the distress fund, where the UIF has put in 4 billion rand, which is to assist companies in distress to ensure that we're able to retain a lot of those jobs. So we've recorded some successes there. Not as much as we would like. Desiree, it's a fact, we've said it before, jobs are being created in this country, but they're not being created at the pace and the scale that our economy requires. And platforms like this are important for all social partners to come together, take, I think, joint, a collaborative approach to ensuring that we're able to respond to this economic crisis of unemployment that we face.
So with the backdrop that you are painting, how does the President feel when Stats SA comes up and says we at a double-digit number and going up in terms of unemployment in the country?
I I think all of us are operating and undertaking our work in a very, very difficult economic environment. I mean, just those unemployment figures that you spoke about, they're the highest since the global recession of 2008. Nobody can be comfortable in such a situation, and that's why the president has felt it necessary that he does put in place interventions like this, where we don't only talk about plans and reforms, but we're able to sit, monitor, and track progress, and where we need to make urgent interventions that we do so. Yes, we don't expect, results to happen overnight, but it is a steady process and one that a government working together with all social partners is determined to see it succeed.
Mr. Vavi, Ms. Diko is saying it's a collaborative process. Does SAFTU feel that it's included in the process?
No, we're not included in the process. We are locked out of NEDLAC. We remain locked out. Every excuse is being put on our way to participate. So it's an exclusive club of the people who largely, seemingly agree broadly with what government is doing. And just to respond to your question, so there's no collaboration that is really inclusive. There's no attempt to include every economic player in the economy in all of the discussions that are taking place behind the backs of workers, above their heads. And so it's an exclusive NEDLAC club of people who seemingly are in love with one another. Just to talk about the issue, our statistic, Comrade Khosela, is this. Since the president took over the reins of government, unemployment have actually increased. So there is no progress, there is regression. When he was elected to be the president, unemployment was sitting at 9.2 million people. As we speak, it is 10.3.
The number of figures we have.
That 6.7 is a very conservative figure.
Are you also
it's
some of the people who have different figures?
Figure, but that official figure discards and does not count workers who are too discouraged, who are no longer waking up every morning to go and find employment opportunities. If you include the workers who are no longer actively searching for employment, the real figure is not 29.1%, Desiree. It is 38.3% or 10.3 million South Africans. Able bodies can't find employment opportunity.
Let's bring in the other participants now. Ms. Losi, let's bring you in. The Job Summit commitments. You were part of the meeting this morning. Do you also feel like it's an exclusive club, as Mr. Vavi asserts?
Thank you very much, Desiree, and greetings to your guest in the studio. I don't agree that it is an exclusive club. There are processes that a federation must follow in order for it to be admitted at NEDLAC, and I think Comrade Zweli knows, when he was still the General Secretary of COSATU, how that process works. The only thing that one needs to do is to ensure that you comply with the requirements of NEDLAC and allow that process to unfold. So it is not an exclusive club of people that agree with each other. For those that are at NEDLAC, and as Comrade Vavi would know, when he used to sit at NEDLAC on behalf of COSATU, that as much as COSATU, as an example, one labor federation that is in alliance with the ANC, but at NEDLAC we don't agree with each and everything. Where there are disagreements, we will raise our disagreements. That is why COSATU in particular will go to NEDLAC and apply for Section 77 to go on strike exactly on the socio-economic issues that we feel that be it is government or it is business that are not in favor of the workers that we represent. So I would disagree that it is an exclusive club, but I would say that there's a process that everyone understands in order for you to be admitted at NEDLAC. In terms of the progress, I agree with Usis Khosela that indeed what was registered, we are not happy with the growth, that has been registered, but there is progress, and we have urged even today. There are a number of areas where we feel that government is not quite pulling in certain departments, and we still feel that there is part of not alignment that is needed with departments. One department moving on its own direction on the same matter, there's a disjuncture, and we've raised those issues at NEDLAC this morning. But we must say that from where we are moving from, for an example, in the auto sector, there are progress that have been made in terms of the investments in that sector. In the in the textile sector, there's also an improvement there. There's also a company now that is manufacturing cell phones. So you can say that it is not the accelerated progress that we want, but there is
to hold on to that thought. We will talk about sectors later on. You're watching Unfiltered today, and we're asking you South Africans to take part in this conversation in terms of finding solutions for unemployment in the country. When we return, we will talk to Mr. Edward Tobejani and also our other guest, Alex van der Heever. Stay with us for that.
This is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories.
One of the things that we are seeing across the globe, people are consuming news and living their lives with their mobile devices.
The evolution of journalism is to use the same skills, the same ethics, the same values, but to cater to different audiences, because it's not the same people.
There is a lot of debate in this industry today whether the future is about digital paid content. Will there be a market for users to pay for digital content? And we see that in Africa it's a challenge.
People will go, pay for a newspaper, take it away. Why won't they pay for it online?
In the initial stages of shifting from print to online, we created the impression that what people were paying for was the paper. And so people are very reluctant to pay for the journalism, and good journalism is very expensive.
Watch Media Monitor Sundays at 9 a.m.
This year, the national debt exceeded 3 trillion rand. It exceeded 3 trillion rand. It is expected to rise to 4.5 trillion in the next 3 years. Clearly, we need to do things differently. As things stand, without any policy adjustments, debt will most likely exceed 70% of GDP by 2022-23. This is a serious position that we find ourselves in.
Finance Minister Tito Mboweni there, looking like he wants to say, let that sink in. Welcome back. You're watching Unfiltered, and our conversation today, we're asking you, South Africans, is the Presidential Working Committee on Jobs working? Like Mhlongo says, it's a waste of public money. Nazim Grootboom saying, no, it hasn't been successful, and it doesn't seem that they're trying to do anything about the unemployment rate except for telling us it will drop by 2030. Let's bring back our guests into the conversation. Edward Tobejani is the Deputy Secretary General at the National Council of Trade Unions. You're very active in this process. You're part of the NEDLAC process that Mr. Vavi says he isn't taking part in. How are you feeling about progress so far a year down the line?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening to our listeners at home. Look, let's start with what Comrade Vavi is saying. What Comrade Vavi is saying, he sounds like a person who has been excluded from the process of NEDLAC.
And he says he has.
And I agree with President Losi that at NEDLAC there are processes and procedures. And Comrade Vavi is aware that...
All right, apparently we have a problem with your mic. While we sort that out, our technicians are going to come through to sort it out. Let's bring in Alex van der Heever. Alex, thank you so much for taking part in this conversation today. What are your thoughts a year down the line in this process? Do you think government is doing sufficient work to ensure that the economy creates jobs?
What we seem to be doing is a lot of what we've done before. And I think that some of the concerns with the statements of the Minister of Finance is that he's not actually presenting very concrete plans in the process that are going to make a difference to the pathways we've seen thus far. And so the question is, what would those be? So on the one hand, we've got to look at how we would re-stimulate the economy. He raises the issue of debts, the rising debt levels within government, but he doesn't really propose a plan to get out of that or to analyze how we got into that. So the danger is that we proceed on a pathway of fiscal consolidation and that is austerity, that can actually undermine growth rates within the economy. So you have to look very carefully at both stimulating the economy while also removing fat in the areas where we're wasting it within government. So that is a redirection of funding, and I'm not seeing that in the proposals. I'll make one point about the Unemployment Insurance Fund. We're sitting there with over 100 billion rands in assets. The fund is structurally overfunded, and none of that money is being used creatively in developing programs which might be considered as high risk.
Creativity is what's needed, isn't it?
And the question is, if you want to look at redistributive programs, which are actually needed when you're trying to stimulate an economy, rather than stimulating at the top end of an economy, you need infrastructure, and you also need job creation programs. You need to link people back into work. You need to provide reskilling programs, and all of those need platforms that we need to create for them. And we haven't really done any of that. So if you look at the smartest countries in the world, they connect industrial policy, social security policy, labour market policy. These are connected by connected platforms. We don't do that. So what we can't do is actually do anything very dynamic or creative. But we sit with 100 billion rand surplus in the UIF. That's doing nothing for the economy. We also sit in the GEPF, and it's quite important to note this.
So we're not necessarily a moneyless economy.
We've got funds in a number of particular pots. One is in the corporate sector, where they have substantial corporate savings, which are remaining locked up because there's nothing being catalyzed in the economy to release it. There's nothing to invest in because they can't see where the demand is. Then we've got government pots, which are sitting there, which are inactive. And then we've got government which is actually wasting a lot of money in poorly defined programs. So, and in badly run departments and badly run public enterprises.
Dr. Tobijan, let's bring you in. Let's pick up from where we left off before Dr. Vavi made fun of you.
Let's start from the start. Evening once more, Desiree, and evening to your listeners. I was responding to what Comrade Zweli said earlier on, that Netlex social partners decided to lock up sub outside. I disagree with him. That's not true. I think we are all listening to what President Losi is saying. But there are processes at Netlex, and of which I believe that Comrade Zweli is aware about those processes. As we are speaking now, there are files with Netlex, but Netlex will decide, will give direction.
I suppose there's no need to gang up against Zulenzima Vavi. He can speak for himself. Tell us what NAC2, how NAC2 is making an impact.
No, NAC2 is part of Netlex, and we are part of the presidential task team that is meeting every Monday of the first week. We believe that process, it will do something for the South African. There will be some improvement. But on the other side, I think I fully agree with Comrade Vavi that no. Look, the issue around unemployment is reaching the sky every day.
When the nation watches you meet on a monthly basis, and Stats SA comes up and says nearly 8 million people are without jobs, and Mr. Vavi says it's almost 10 million. Are we supposed to be encouraged by these processes?
I think we should be encouraged by the process at Netlex, because that process, it involves everybody, except Comrade Vavi, who there is a process that is still unfolding. But we believe that process, it will assist the process for employment in the near future.
It's starting to feel like it's a Besh Vavi day, but we'll talk about that later. Let's take a break. You're watching Unfiltered. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
Many often share their worry about artificial intelligence taking their jobs away. The truth of the matter is that artificial intelligence does a lot of things faster and better than humans.
That machine didn't make itself, it was made by a human being. So which means us as human beings, we need to think more on the skills which we have.
I feel like ultimately it'll increase productivity and efficiency of things.
There's a lot of apprehension from the staff. The staff is really worried, what's going to happen, am I going to lose my job? Is machines going to take over the world? The reality of the matter is though that the future is a blend of humans.
I don't like the sound of it too much. The fourth industrial,
on Network every Sunday at 8:30 p.m.
Stabilization involves difficult decisions that imply sacrifices by all of us. Slowing growth in the compensation bill and additional revenue measures will be needed. The consequence of not acting now would be grave for South Africa. Over time, the country would likely face mounting debt service costs and higher interest rates and may enter a debt trap. The unemployment crisis would worsen and government debt could balloon. This is an outcome we all are determined to avoid.
The unemployment crisis will worsen. A warning that was once given by the state president there, given by the finance minister. Now, welcome back. You're watching Unfiltered. Let's take a look at some of the tweets that have come through this evening. Leos Tembi saying, it'll get worse first before it gets better. Too much money meant for uplifting the lives of ordinary people has been stolen. Once again, the issue of corruption coming up there. Iboniswani Calvin Muzikiti saying the programs have been implemented to help young youth employment, but the looters are a problem. I once was on a national youth service on the extended public works program. The learnership, we ended up not getting our stipend and the certificate where were mistaken, written wrong names of us. We promised when we finished the program we were going to be employed at public works, but nothing happened in that way. Continue to send us your thoughts. We're having a conversation today. We're having it with labor role players, but we're also asking you, South Africans, to tell us your thoughts, what you can contribute in terms of thought in improving the situation in South Africa. Mr. Ko, let's just take off from what Mr. Van Heever was saying, and also that concern that when the Presidential Working Committee was set up, it was just before the elections, and since then, the president has now officially come in as the leader of the 6th administration, but there were reconfiguration of government and certain emphasis put in different places, and there might have been a lapse during that time when not much emphasis was given to this project. Could that be the case?
Well, Desiree, you'll remember that this is really the third meeting of the Presidential Working Group on the Job Summit. It was established after the very first quarterly meeting that was meant to report on progress. And I think that was where the need was identified to ensure that we really give focused attention to the implementation of the framework agreement, but also to ensure that the commitments that each and every social partner has made are carried through. So it's been 3 meetings, but what it's enabled us to do, Desiree, is firstly to break down the silo approach. If you listen to President Losi, she speaks about how government was operating in silos, the left hand did not really know what the right hand is doing. But through this working group on the Job Summit, we're able to have all of government sitting together. Just in the second meeting, which was held last month, we moved, for example, on the issue of water licenses. You know, especially in the agriculture, this has proven to be a problem where you wait even years to get a water license. They were called into the meeting, and there was an agreement to reduce significantly reduce that time to a matter of days, not more than 2 months, I think, was the agreement. But we've also recorded successes. I mean, one of the things the professor speaks talks about is to what extent are we looking at infrastructure development, perhaps as a way in which we're able to start mitigating some of these challenges that we face. Now, in the meeting today, there was a report that your catalytic housing projects, which are some of the agreements that had come out of the Job Summit, have already created jobs. Again, not enough, as I've indicated. Yeah. So there has to be consistent focus. I mean, we get to the meeting and you would find that organized labor raises as one of the big challenges the fact that government has established what they call a temporary employer-employee relief scheme, which is meant to ensure that if a company is going through a difficult time, is likely to retrench workers, we're able to take those employees, you put them in a training program for a period perhaps up to about 6 months. They're paid a training allowance, and obviously that gives some relief to the company, hopefully for them to catch the next upswing of the economy. So these are interventions that are being made. But Labour says, again, they're not happy with the progress. Perhaps government is not doing as much as it should to ensure that that program is implementing effectively, and it assists then that this working committee is able to identify those hindrances, and in the next meeting you get them to come and explain the relevant government departments what the challenges have been and what they're going to do to rectify that situation. We've had ICASA there to discuss the issue of spectrum. Today we had the pharmaceutical regulator also looking at what are the challenges that are hindering, development and growth of the pharmaceutical industry.
Ms. Lossie, there's perception that there's disagreement within COSATU about how to engage and interact with the Sixth Administration, especially with matters relating to the Finance Minister and his paper on solutions for growing the economy. What conversations are taking place within COSATU about how to bring about solutions for unemployment in South Africa?
Well, Des, I'm not sure of the contradictions. Perhaps I have not been appraised of them. So unless you can direct me to a particular challenge that you may have come across.
For instance, when for
I
optics,
have not been...
For instance, when we see you at the meeting this morning interacting with the President about finding solutions to go forward, and then you hear COSATU officials say, we will not accept Finance Minister Tito Mbowene's suggestions in terms of how to grow the economy. There's obviously disjointed communication there.
No, it cannot be. The fact that we sit at NEDLEC today and we sit in the PwC does not suggest that we agree with everything that takes place in government. We issued a statement as a federation on our take in relation to the medium-term budget policy statement of Minister Tito Mboweni. We have criticized that statement.
I'm terribly sorry to do this to you, but if I don't, they're going to cut us off air. We coming off from the SABC 3 platform. In a moment, we'll be back. We'll pick up again from where Ms. Lossie left off. Stay with us. You're watching Unfiltered.
On Economics Unbound, we unpack everything from corruption.
On the day he resigned, he was not aware of any fraud. Of course, they called it accounting irregularities. We've always called it fraud.
To the effect global activities have on different economies around the world.
This drone attack seems to be the single worst sudden disruption ever in the world oil market. But what does all of this mean for South Africa and the rest of the world?
The last thing we need is a spike in oil prices and a disruption in oil supply. We will have a repeat of the recession of the 70s, which is really very dire for the global economy.
Join Thandeka and Nana on Economics Unbound, Thursdays at 9 p.m.
This is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories.
One of the things that we are seeing across the globe, people are consuming news and living their lives with their mobile devices.
The evolution of journalism is to use the same skills, the same ethics, the same values, but to cater to different audiences, because it's not the same people.
There is a lot of debate in this industry today whether the future is about digital paid content. Will there be a market for users to pay for digital content? And we see that in Africa it's a challenge.
People will go, pay for a newspaper, take it away. Why won't they pay for it online?
In the initial stages of shifting from print to online, we created the impression that what people were paying for was the paper. And so people are very reluctant to pay for the journalism, and good journalism is very expensive.
Watch Media Monitor Sundays at 9 a.m.
The economy is now forecast to grow at 0.5% in 2019 compared to 1.5% expected in February. Growth is projected to slowly rise to 1.7% in 2022, a situation which is not pleasing at all.
Welcome once again. You're still watching Unfiltered. We need to release the presidential spokesperson, Ms. Kusela Diko. But just as a last point, Ms. Diko, what's the way forward? How do we bring on board the South African public so that you get a buy-in in terms of taking this project forward?
Well, Desiree, I suppose it's a work in progress. It's only when the South African people do see these tangible results that we're talking about that we'll get that buy-in that we require. Just tomorrow, the President will be leading the South African delegation at the investment conference. This is the second investment conference, and already we're seeing significant results from that. You'll remember that a month ago, we opened a plant in Durban, which was manufacturing phones. We are launching an extension of an automotive hub in Tshwane tomorrow, and these are some of the projects that come from that. So while progress is not as quick as we would like it to be, I think once the South African people begin to see those results, the communities, for example, of Mamelodi, that will benefit from that particular automotive hub, those will be the people who will begin to tell the stories of the successes that this government is making.
Thanks for coming through tonight.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Vavi, are you feeling left out with all these developments?
I don't want to dwell on this, but let me just say this because I'm more interested to answer what the minister is saying on screen and what Kusela is saying. In relation to Network, yes, we were there all our lives, or since it was established. My friends here drew rules on the eve of SAF2's coming into being, designed to make sure that SAF2 is blocked out of Network. What were those rules that were never there before in our time? No, hold on. What were those rules? They said you can only come into Network once you have finished 2 years in existence and once you can produce 2 years of auditor statements. We waited that out. We presented what they asked for, and now that we have presented that out, they're saying, okay, can you give us audited statements of each of your unions? Something that was not originally in the conditions is designed now to continue the blockage. So it's an exclusive club meant and designed to only have a conversation between the people who broadly agree with one another, designed to exclude truly independent, militant, and fighting unions. But that's not what the discussion is about today. The discussion is about the jobs. Anybody who will say we are making progress in relation to the crisis of unemployment in our country lives in another planet. The Statistics South Africa report every quarter points to a worsening situation. I mean, we have 10.3 million people. We had 10.2 in the previous quarter. We have 38.3%. We had 38% in the previous quarter. We had 58% as we speak of youth unemployed. We had 55% in the previous quarter. Who can say this is progress? That's the first point. The second point I wanted to make, it is just not true that South Africa is facing a debt crisis. South Africa is facing a growth crisis, is facing an unemployment crisis, a poverty crisis, an inequality crisis, a corruption crisis. We are not addressing the real issue. Instead, inspired by neoliberalism, we are suddenly beating ourselves up, and despite the relevant evidence that shows that we are not in a debt. For example, the IMF says the average debt of the world economies is sitting at 83% in terms of the GDP debt ratio. We are sitting at around 55, 60% now.
Yeah.
The average debt for the developed countries is 103%. The average rate of the developing countries is around 55%. I agree.
Alex, I'm going to
so
ask
this
you when I
propaganda
return.
that there is a debt crisis, we must reduce the government expenditure, we must tighten the belt more, we must squeeze the life out of the poor even more, is a self-serving propaganda from the rich.
I'm going to
country.
ask you, once I've spoken to Ms. Losi, if this is exaggerated. But Ms. Losi, let me ask you, which specific areas does COSATU disagree with government on? And do you also think that the message that it's improving is not necessarily realistic?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Do you agree with the perception that things are improving in the country in terms of creating jobs, albeit not at the required rate?
We for an example, on the issue of job creation, we have said even today in the meeting at NEDLAC that the economy continues to lose jobs. And when we deal with this issue, at the same time, because for an example, the report from the CCMA points it clearly, and we have even argued there that the statistics that has been given by the CCMA in terms of what they have received is not a true reflection of what is taking place in the labor market. The CCMA has registered that out of 22,000 retrenchments that they have dealt with, they have managed to save about 9,559 of those jobs. And we have said today that as much as we appreciate this that comes from the CCMA, but we know that employers continue to retrench workers outside the CCMA process because they can only register that. So it tells us that what we are dealing with at face value, it is not exactly what the economy is dealing with. But we must also say, Des, that in spite of all of that, because we must also record that in South Africa, we have about 400,000 job seekers that are entering the labor market. You see, sometimes we say the progress that South Africa makes has also consequences because it then brings people in the region and in the continent to come and leave their countries and migrate to South Africa to look for greener pastures, which takes us, and at that moment we're dealing with an economy that is not growing. But we must register, as Sis Kusela said, that in the auto sector, for an example, there are about 385,000 in the auto manufacturing sector in terms of jobs that have been created. And we are also registering that in the clothing and textile, we have managed to stabilize that part of the sector. But of course, we're not saying there are no challenges. And we continue to argue as South Africa, and I agree with Mr. Vavi to some extent, but we also said that our successes are also the problems that we are going to face with. Until we're able to stabilize and talk about the regional stability, it does not matter what we're trying to do. We must fight corruption inside our country. We must deal with inefficient government departments. We must deal also with public servants in particular who continue to press that button to exacerbate corruption in our country. We must ensure that we have SOEs that are efficient and effective. But also we must deal with the political instability in the region, because as long as we have political instability in the region and in the continent, people will continue to migrate to South Africa, and these rising high levels of unemployment, inequality will continue to rise. So it is not just about focusing in our country, South Africa, but in the absence of us ensuring that how are we going to bring stability in South Africa, in the region, in the continent, to grow our economy, we will continue to have these challenges. But of course, we're not excusing inefficient people in government, in the state-owned enterprises, And I think also importantly, what the president has acknowledged today at NEDLAC is that out of the 7 priorities, what he should have done was to put the capability of the state as the first part instead of it being the last. Because out of the meeting today, it was evident that if you have a state that is not capable to drive the economy in this country and to make serious interventions in the economy, everything else will not be able to take off. So it is those issues. But of course, as we said, when COSATU went to the PwC meeting today, and when we were in the PwC in the last month, and we will continue to be in that, it is not a reflection of contradictions in the federation, because where we do not agree, for an example, the issue of the public sector wage bill, we're very clear on what we do not agree with. I'm just making one example with regards to that. But, excuse me, COSATU has been very clear on what we appreciate, what we do not agree with, and what is it that we should do moving forward.
Alex, the president speaks a lot about partnerships and the social compact. Are these collaborations working? Is it credible if parties like SAFTU are left out?
I think it's not credible. So there was a comment that he made on the earlier on, in that people have to make sacrifices in order to get the economy moving again. And this implies policies that are kind of zero-sum game. Somebody has to lose in order for us to get out of this mess. So the question is, who is he implying has to lose to do that? Mm-hmm. And that's a very important question, because it's a question of what kind of policy mix is he talking about. South Africa's problems today in terms of economic growth are largely a result of a massive concentration of wealth and a massive concentration of earnings at the top end of the economy. That structurally affects how diverse our economy is, and that fundamentally affects our trade balance and our performance, and whether or not people are prepared to invest here. Because in fact, when we restrict demand only to the top 5% of the economy, there's only so many products that you can make in South Africa. And that's part of what is not addressed at all in the redesign of the economy. And in terms of overstating the government debt issue, I mean, it is an issue that...
Why do you think that's the case?
Well, first of all, the overstating of the government debt needs to take into account the assets that government has. So one of the assets that exists is the government employees pension fund fully advance funded reserve, which is well over 2 trillion rand. And if you go to the United States, the federal pension fund is not fully advance funded. So the United States debt to GDP ratio, it's about 130% of GDP. And South Africa is sitting in the sort of 55s. That you've got to take into account that we actually have a major asset that we're not using properly, and we're actually having to debt service because we're actually putting money into the government employees pension fund that isn't required to underwrite its liabilities, because the taxpayer ultimately underwrites them. So any body or any organization with an indefinite life that is underwritten by the taxpayer can't actually be advance funded and protected through a reserve the type we have in the GEPF.
Even though the money's there.
And so we're paying an additional 70 billion rand a year into that fund, which should be paying down our government debt. When we start to look creatively at, first of all, our own national accounts, we actually have a very different balance sheet to many other countries. We're actually in a positive position. And in fact, this overfunding of the GEPF has been used in order to generate a false sense of austerity, and has limited the redistributive policies that we need to stimulate and diversify our economy. So economic growth is not going to happen in South Africa fundamentally unless we change, restructure the distribution of income in South Africa. And that is something that is not in government policy at this point. On the piecemeal programs that the representative from the presidency was talking about are pinpricks in the economy. We have to have major structural issues.
I'd like you to tell me, when we come back from this break, what the end game is of not utilizing the resources that are already there. And Mr. Vavi, I can see you're itching to talk.
I'm itching.
I'll come straight to you when we come back from this break. Let's take a break.
Many often share their worry about artificial intelligence taking their jobs away. The truth of the matter is that artificial intelligence does a lot of things faster and better than humans.
That machine didn't make itself, it was made by a human being. So which means us as human beings, we need to think more on the skills which we have.
I feel like ultimately it'll increase productivity and efficiency of things.
There's a lot of apprehension from the staff. The staff is really worried. What's going to happen? Am I going to lose my job? Is machines going to take over the world? The reality of the matter is, though, that the future is a blend of humans.
I don't like the sound of it too much. The fourth industrial,
On Network every Sunday at 8:30 p.m.
The SABC News mobile app is your one-stop digital portal to all the news you need. Stay connected with the latest in breaking news. Watch the SABC News channel along with clips and live streams of all the big news events. And listen to all the SABC News radio stations live, including podcasts and much more. Simply download the SABC News app to your Android or iOS device from either the Play Store or the App Store. SABC News, independent, impartial.
Going forward, any form of support to state-owned enterprises will no longer be in the form of equity, but loans. And a loan needs to be repaid with interest. Once I'm convinced that the ESCOM board and management have made an irrevocable commitment to the implementation of the government decisions and that there is enough progress, we'll negotiate the appropriate size of debt relief. ESCOM is a business and it should be run like a business.
He hasn't stopped the bailouts to ESCOM and SAA.
There is no economy anywhere in the world that sustains growth and becomes much more dependable in terms of job creation without focusing on industrialization, and in particular in the manufacturing sector.
Once the people are employed, they will then pay their tolls. They will then be able to spend the money that they earn because they are here. If you don't do that, you're letting them sit on the side of the street.
Well, that's a comment from politicians in Parliament last week responding to the medium-term budget statement by the Finance Minister. But the conversation and the focus today is around employment and how everyone can come in terms of finding solutions. We asked you that question if you think the Presidential Working Committee on Jobs is working 1 year down the line. Violinists saying it's working and getting successful for his family and groupies. Otherwise, for the country, it isn't working. He's more of a family president than the nation's president. Ouch. Fistos Maigezo, all right, that jumped quickly. We're saying DFIs are not funding projects demanding owners' contributions, while DTI is failing to plug the gap by providing grant funding to create jobs. Please fix DFIs and DTI. Mokhetwa Babale saying, how can the president create jobs when the economy is so low? Where will the government get the money to create jobs? So the president is working on the economy so that he can later create jobs. All right, don't quite understand that one, but let's go to another one. All right, I thought we were getting a fourth tweet, but we're not. Continue to interact with us. Mr. Vavi, you were saying?
I was itching because there's the statements that are being made by the president of COSATU and the Kusela Tigo, the spokesperson of the president, about that. Again, we are making progress. Look at the project. We have been launching this project here. We are launching the other one.
Seemingly there is progress. That's why I was asking you if you don't feel left out.
That's exactly my point.
Yeah.
Always look at what is the end project. When people say there's progress, then check the figures. What does the figures tell us now? The figures are telling us that South Africa is sitting at a rate of only 18% investment to the GDP overall. The figures tell us that the private sector investment is sitting at 13% for the past 10 years. The Tumamina and the New Dawn have not inspired them to invest. What are they doing instead? Look at the report that was issued by the Johannesburg or University of Johannesburg. It says the firms in South Africa are sitting on a 1.6 trillion rands of investable cash that they will not invest in the economy. The same point that
Professor van der Heever made.
Exactly, that's the point. So let's not, they can go to the jamboree and talk and mislead one another about investment. Look at the results. An economy trapped in an 18% to the GDP investment ratio will not grow, no matter how handsome the minister looks like, as long as you're still not having a strategy to lift the public sector investment, which is absolutely low, hovering below 40% of that 18% and up as down as 30% because of the austerity programs, the cutting of the budgets. That's the crisis. So I was saying to you, Desiree, we have a crisis of a growth. The instruments that we have chosen will not grow this economy. All of what the Minister of Finance is saying will continue to trap our economy into a low growth path where more jobs will be lost, where more inequalities will be seen, and more people will be living in poverty. That's a hard reality. Let's look at all of the facts and tell me where's the progress. Progress where? In the skies, but not progress that is affecting the ordinary people in our country.
NATO says it envisages an economy built along African lines with more trade and collaboration done with fellow African states. Now, there's something else that Ms. Losi mentioned about the public sector wage bill. It's quite a big problem. The finance minister mentioned it in his address last week. What sort of conversation is NACTU? How is NACTU thinking about this problem and how to solve it?
Look, this country is facing a serious problem. What the finance minister addressed the nation last week, he did not go direct to the areas that are affecting the poor of the poor. He did not even address the nation about the report that was submitted to the South African by Mr. Maluleke. He only mentioned two states of South Africa. Remember, Mr. Maluleke submitted stats of unemployment.
Okay.
Correct, yeah. And partly I agree with Comrade Zweli when he speaks of 10.5 million unemployment. 10.3. Yeah, 10.3 unemployment. You unbundled into two pieces. There are those who are no longer seeking for a job. They went out and looked for a job. They are tired now. They decided to sit at home without going out and look for a job. There are those who are coming from universities. We are speaking about the youngsters here who are currently sitting at home. There is no hope for them to find a job. Thirdly, there's the so-called SOEs that are sitting there. The Minister of Finance only speaks about two. And when you listen to him when he speaks about two, he speaks of SAA, but when you listen to his language, he sounds like he's in favor of ESCOM. So one question, why is he saying positive things about ESCOM and bad things about SAA? But what about others?
ESCOM is one of the big problems.
Correct, yeah. What about others? Remember, there is a PRASA, there's Transnet.
There's a larger problem with SOEs.
Problems are there.
Yes.
And those SOEs, the plan or the strategy is to create employment for the South Africans. And up until today, we are still struggling. We don't have a solution unless something comes up tomorrow, but I don't think so.
Let me bring in another aspect here. We've been talking about the social compact, Ms. Losi, and I'll ask the same question of all of our guests tonight. Recently, the Motsepe Foundation announcing that it will create a program to create jobs as a social project. What are your thoughts about that, Ms. Losi, in terms of philanthropy in the labor creation space?
We need all of those that can make a contribution. Actually, maybe philanthropy is part of putting back what you have gained from the people of this country. It does not come as charity necessarily. It is a social responsibility for those that have benefited out of the profits that would have made because people have been able to be economic active to some extent. So it is not necessarily a charity, but we welcome that. In critically, even if Patrice Motsepe can make that, if it lands in the hands of those that are greedy, as some of the listeners have said on the tweets, it goes into a deep hole. So, for an example, COSATU, we are pleased that there is a bit of a progress in terms of the public procurement bill, which is going to address partly what Comrade Zweli was raising on government also ensuring that the locals are able to be part of the economy by ensuring that they also invest in the local business. Yes. We are also happy with the fact that today at NETLEC we received a report from Productivity South African, where they are also saying that they are working with different sectors, particularly the furniture group, that they would want big businesses to begin to make an investment and give business opportunities to our own local economies, where our own people in the local economy, be it in communities where we live in, who are also making furniture, and was saying to government, procure with these local businesses.
Once again, time constraints, and we only have 2 minutes, and I'm going to ask all of you gentlemen your thoughts about philanthropy and job creation, but you can also give your parting shots. Alex?
Well, philanthropy is fine if you do it, but it's not a way to achieve systemic reform in an economy. We essentially have to use the big money. So private expenditure is unlocked very often through smart government investment, where you stimulate the economy and domestic demand in the right areas. It's not only by government procurement, on domestic procurement, but it's also by stimulating demand that is domestically oriented, and we don't do that. So manufacturing has to evolve in South Africa and not just be constructed. It has to evolve because we've got a much wider group of people who're spending money and not just 5% of the economy.
Edward?
I think that it is a challenge. It's a challenge to the South Africans. I don't think we'll reach what we are dreaming that we'll reach tomorrow because of, for example, the government is going out and seek for investors. Investors are coming in, or rather they're not coming in, but if they are coming in, tomorrow this country will not end up being in our hands.
Yeah. Is it applicable in this case to say izwe linzima?
Absolutely. For the unemployed, it is absolutely a disaster. Anybody who sits in South Africa with these levels of unemployment is risking a civil war that can implode anytime. I mean, when we have 47% of your black African women unemployed, with 58% of the youth unemployed, what do you expect those people should live? So here's a brief proposal that we want to make. We need a government that is not going to scapegoat the foreigners, as our president of COSATU is saying, but the government that is going to bring us a real stimulus package, not that thing that disappeared into the thin air.
Not austerity.
The president, not austerity programs. This is not the way to go. The Americans didn't go austerity program. They did a real stimulus program. What we need is increased levels of investment in the economy. And there's many ways of doing that. For starters, the Treasury officials are saying to us they are losing between 30 and 40% of their budget.
They're going to cut us off air, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm sorry,
but let me say thank you so much to all of our guests tonight. It's a continuing conversation. We asked you a question today. 1 year down the line, has the Presidential Working Group on Employment been successful? 10% of you say yes, and a whopping 90% of you say not really. That's how we end our program today. Thank you so much once again to our guests tonight. Till next week, Monday. Bye-bye.